Welcome to Day 3 of DynamicsCon. We hope you're feeling the power of community from the first 2 days filled with learning and networking. Thank you to our sponsors for making this event entirely free. Now, let's gear up for an adventurous final day of DynamicsCon.
Last year was tough, and it may have surfaced some ugly truths, but there's good news. We've made a permanent shift to be more prepared, flexible, productive, and secure. Sunrise Technologies can help you pivot with the Microsoft Cloud. Consumer brands, retailers, and manufacturers work with us to simplify operations, unify disconnected information, and respond quickly to any challenge the world throws your way. If you're still struggling, then let this be your breakthrough year. Invite Sunrise to your team to help you enable your digital transformation.
Please welcome our first speaker of the day, Michael Stashwick, a senior technical architect. Today, he will be presenting Logic Apples with F&O. Please stick around after Michael's session for a live Q&A.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to DynamicsCon. I'm your host for this session, Michael Stashwick, and today we're going to be covering using Logic Apps with Dynamics Finance and Operations. First, I wanted to thank you for voting for me. It really means a lot. I was humbled by all the support I got from everyone. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm the blogger behind D365 stuff. And I've also been a senior technical architect at Sunrise Technologies for 11 years now. Before that, I actually got my start in the 3.0 days on some projects. So if you do the math, that means I've survived 362 versions of Dynamics, which I know, I have a hard time believing it too. So let's move forward. Here's the agenda for the day. So first, we're going to talk about what is Azure Logic Apps. And yes, that is the right grammar for it. Then I broke the presentation into 3 parts because whenever I think about integrating data, I think of 3 main patterns that we're either pushing data in, we're pulling it out, or we can also push it out as well. When we push data into D365, I'm going to use the NQ API, and the source system for all those is going to be the Logic app or the source system itself. When we pull data out, I'm going to use a combination of the D365 OData APIs and the DQ API, so we can do a comparison of which API is better for what kind of scenario. I'll also even show you how I can use custom web services to make that work better. And again, since we're pulling data out of D365, what's going to kick that off is either the Logic app or the source system. And then finally, we're going to get into pushing data out of D365, but we're going to do it in real time. Anyone who's ever been through a scoping exercise knows that when it comes to integrations, there's real-time integrations, and then there's real-time integrations. It could be close to real time, but this, I really want to get into I need to know the price of Bitcoin right now, that fast kind of real-time integration, not something that seems real-time or link real-time. And then we'll conclude with some final thoughts. So first of all, what is Azure Logic Apps? Is it something you order for the table before a big meal? No. If anything, it's the intermezzo between a savory source system and a tantalizing target system. But really, it's middleware. It's a cloud-based service. It's serverless, and you can schedule and automate processes and workflows. And so that does go beyond middleware. I didn't mean to cut it short. You can integrate between cloud and on-premise systems with Logic Apps. However, if you're going to use an on-premise system, it requires the on-premise data gateway to install. And the most important thing about it, I think, is that it's designer first. It being serverless and scalable with an easy-to-use designer means that you just have to focus on logic and what you have to do. Everything else is someone else's problem. And in terms of the stack, if you're familiar with Power Automate, that actually sits on top of Logic Apps. So if you have experience with Power Automate, all of your experience is going to transfer really well, and you'll have a good head start getting into Logic Apps. And then finally, don't ask me how much it's going to cost. I'm not on the sales team, but you only pay for what you need. All the pricing and metering is based on consumption, so you don't have to worry about a super fancy plan. So let's get into it. So here is the first app I made for you. The scenario I thought for pushing data to D365, a lot of customers I've been to, they need to import a giant demand forecast. And I don't blame them. Like, you sell stuff, you don't want to have to think about what the forecast is going to be down the line. Have someone else do it, send it to you. And that usually occurs in a big flat file. So I created an app here, and I'm going to open up the designer. And this is what I mean when it says it's designer first. You can just add steps, add operations, and just focus on the meat of your application. Now, let's say you're Keanu Reeves in the Matrix and you want to see the code. You can see everything in code. The world is still there. You want to be careful if you edit in here, because when you go back to the designer, there's a good chance your designer will be like, I don't know what you did. So I usually stick to designer. And just so you know, every single application I made for this demo was 100% in the designer. So whenever you start, you're either going to have a trigger that is on a time schedule, or it could be a file was created in an SFTP site, or any other kind of file share. And then step 2, we're going to get that file content. In this example, I'm using OneDrive as my SFTP, and I made a giant forecast file. Let's see, how big is it? It's just over 100,000 rows, which I think is pretty healthy. I wanted to do something big to show the scalability of what we're doing. And it's in the folder. So then once I get the contents, just giant string, I'm going to push it to D365. And you're going to see this HTTP connector a lot during this presentation. It's the bread and butter of how I get things in and out. There are some D365 specific connectors with Logic Apps, but they can be deprecated. There could be new ones. It's always changing. And I wanted to give you something that's forever as opposed to something that might fade away. So whenever you build your HTTP block, the first thing you really need to figure out is how to authenticate and connect to D365. So obviously, since you can see my screen, the secret is out. If you're going to spread it, I guess it's not a secret anymore. But when you go through your credentials, the tenant is essentially who's paying the bills. In this case, my employer, Sunrise. The audience is the environment link. And so you should be able to copy and paste it and navigate to it, just like so, and be like, hey, that works. Never, ever, ever put a slash at the end of your audience or you'll be sorry. 9 times out of 10, when someone asks me why they can't connect to their environment, it's because there's a slash there. And then your client and secret, that comes from an IT administrator. And so this is it. And I know it seems kind of simple, 3 steps, but I really consider this to be an enterprise level solution. So this is the Logic app. And now we're going to get into the data project in D365 that it connects to. So here I have the entity, and I set up a recurring job with it. And that's it. It's turned on and we're ready to go. So all I'm going to do is click run. And by run, I mean I'm going to enable the app and then click run. Because if you leave everything enabled for a schedule, you can rack up a big Azure bill. And that's it. It's done. So what I really like about running things in Logic apps is there's a story that's told. So I can click into everything. I can see it took 2 seconds to get the file content. I can see exactly what it pulled from the file, the name. And then when I can go to this HTTP post and I can see status 200, it was a success. Oops, clicked out. But everything went well. And I can also see this message in the bot. Let me go back up. And I can also see this GUID in the body, which is going to tie back to the integration in D365. So when I go to manage messages here, it's processing. This message ID lines up with what was in my Logic app. So I'll always have that link and can tell the story of, hey, I sent a file to you and I can see it over here. I think it's very important whenever you have an integration or pushing data back and forth that there's this transparency and that this storytelling can be done. And let's see, the file is processed. So the rest of that story, these files are processed on a batch schedule. So I can see at 5:37, the file was received, and then the batch job picked it up at 5:38, and then it was done at 5:39 processing it. I can go to the execution details, and everything that we see in data projects in D365 applies here. The Logic app was just getting it to the system. So I can see that I created those 100,000 rows. And I can even see the staging data if I click on it. So it's really nice to have that layer because someone could send you a message and it not show up correctly in your system. And it would be really easy for you to say, well, this is what I see. And did it happen when I was transforming that data at another layer? Was it sent over correctly? This really allows you to have that transparency and be proactive in everything that's going on. So I can see it's there, and I can even navigate now to my forecast in D365. And everything is there. So at this point, I imagine some people are going over to the comments section and saying, Mike, that was great. It was really fast. Everything just seemed to line up so perfect for you. But we live in Earth in the year 2021, and things don't always go perfectly for us. Is this still going to work for us in Earth 2021? And yes, it is. I see you. I feel you. I made an app for you. So imagine it's been a long week, long day, long month, long year and change. Maybe it was just a long 10 minutes and you're browsing the internet, just looking for a hit of serotonin, and you find the most adorable picture of a raccoon that you've ever seen in your life. Right here. And you feel good for a moment and you save it because you're going to need that raccoon later. But you accidentally save it to your production SFTP server as opposed to, your private stash. So I'm going to show you the journey this raccoon goes through, going from SFTP to D365. And the only difference in this app from the last one is that I added a bunch of delay steps. Here's one. It just sits for 90 seconds. This one sits for 3 minutes. And I'm going to keep getting the statuses from D365 along the way, so you can see the story of everything this raccoon goes through and what happens. Because I get it. You live on Earth in 2021. So I learned my lesson last time. Let's enable it and let's run it. And it's running, and it's going to run for 5 minutes. So, okay. So after some movie magic, the raccoon has run its course, and I don't know about you, but I'm really excited to see what trouble it caused. So again, I got a file out of OneDrive. I pushed it over to D365, status code 200, which is a success. I mean, I think this was a success. And then throughout here, I'm getting acknowledgements. And so here, when I first pushed it, I got this value in queued, tells us that the raccoon got in the message queue. Going back to where we just were in our recurring jobs, he's in the message queue, causing trouble. And then we waited 90 seconds and we checked again, and the raccoon got to a processing state, doing pretty well. And then I gave him 3 minutes to cause even more damage. And this is where we can see that he was processed with errors. I don't know why that image of a raccoon would have been processed with errors trying to go to a demand forecast table. But all those messages processed with errors, it lines up with D365 and in that message. So I really like this because you can proactively, as from the D365 perspective, tell what's going on with people sending data and tell that story. And also, this is a good time to bring up error handling, because status 200, that's a pass. And a buddy of mine was asking me the other day, like, how do you handle errors? Do you kick off an email? Because you can have alerts on Logic Apps to email you when there's failures. Do you kick off another flow? Well, in this case, all success, right? So you have to look at, and so in this situation, since all these, we'll call them raccoon catapults, succeeded getting to D365, Logic Apps would never notify you due to a failure. So this is one of those scenarios where, look at the status of what you sent over, and then maybe you could kick off another flow or email. If I go back to that forecast example, the first one I did, since I'm not perfect, I did botch that a few times in rehearsals, and you can see these failures. So that is something where you could say, hey, you can configure in monitoring, email me because this was a really bad failure. I don't even know what I was doing here, because a raccoon literally did better than whatever I was trying to do here. So that's everything I have for pushing data into D365. So now we're going to talk about pulling it out. And for that, I have this little app. We'll go back into the designer, and let's see, what am I looking at? We're looking at customer groups. So Again, HTTP, instead of posting data, we're going to get it out for the method. Authentication, secrets out, you know that story. And the URL that I put in here, it needs to be a real live functioning URL. So I can copy and paste it. And it actually takes me, to this endpoint in D365. This is one of the really cool things about OData. So I know that what I'm seeing in my web browser right now is what's going to come into the Logic app. Now, before I kick it off, I should say, this isn't the most human readable thing, unless you're like me and spends way too much time with it. So I wrote the Logic app to parse the data. One of the cool things about Logic apps is when it wants to come up with a schema to understand JSON or anything, you can use a sample payload. So to do that, you click the sample payload button, and then you can just copy and paste from the endpoint that data, and it will generate this schema for you. Where, with the customer account number sequence, customer group, that was all generated just from copying and pasting. And then I create an array variable where I'm going to put all the data into, and then I loop through, and I just picked a few fields: customer group, data area ID, description, payment terms, and then I throw those into the array and create a CSV table out of it. And one of these days I will learn to enable my apps. So it's enabled. Now we're going to run. And this should be pretty fast. Voila. So let's see here. Fast, 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 fast. Looping through 4 seconds, not so fast. Hooray. But at the end of the day, we got this really cool table of customer group. Now, that was pretty neat. I don't know how practical it is, because who really integrates customer groups? So could we use OData for a giant table set? And we just made one. So let's see what happens if we try to do a similar thing, but with 100,000 forecast records. Enable our app. We'll check at the designer. This is a 2-step one. I am just getting data out of the demand forecast, because I can tell you right now, if I tried to put in the table, it would never finish. So let's run this. A few moments. If I had to guess, it'll be around 8 seconds. Come on. You can bet in the comments right now how close to 8 seconds it'll be. $14. Sorry, guys. Okay, so that was just pulling that data out. And since the output was so big, we need to download it. And I mean really download it. So I will just save this to my fancy DynamicsCon folder. Okay, there it is, the action outputs. And just so it's easier to read, I'm going to put it into a formatter. Now maybe this will be closer to 8 seconds. So let's see how many rows of JSON we got. Now, I see 26,000 rows. And if memory serves, in addition to a raccoon, we sent over 100,000 before. Now, I know that this isn't apples to apples. Like if I look at this data, there's about 26 lines per what would be a record in a table. We can see data area ID, rec ID, the item number, the warehouse, all that. But so 26,000 divided by 26, 10,000. Oh, that's right. OData has a limit of 10,000 records per poll. So, woof, right? That's a downside there. So what is our next option then? Because we want the whole table, right? We're going to use the DQ API. So let's go to next logic app. Not so fast, Michael. You need to enable it. And let's see what we have going on here. So again, I just have recurrence. We're going to pull a file out of D365 referencing the data project. We're going to download the file, and then I'm going to put it in two places. I'm going to unzip it in blob storage, and I'm also going to throw it back into my OneDrive folder. So I have this fancy demand forecast export project. I'm going to go to my recurring jobs. It's disabled. I'm going to enable it. And the next over under is how long is it going to take to create a new message? Ooh, it's in process. Processed. And there we can see our 100,000 rows. Really quick, because I don't want a lot of these, I'm going to disable it. And so now, sorry, got a little click happy there. We have our 100,000 file export hanging out here. So now the logic app is going to pull it. But this brings up a big thing about timing. So if I wanted to be, a little devious, this file is essentially a snapshot in time. I could go back to the demand forecast and delete all those records, right? I could just be a raccoon getting caught in the wheels of demand forecasting. And so then when the logic app pulls this isn't going to be a real-time image of what's in the system, because I had to make the file. The file's chilling there. It took 7 seconds to do, which is pretty fast, right? But you always want to be aware of the timing. And again, these message statuses are very important. So it's in a process status. And now we get to run the app. Comment section for over under on how long this takes. I'm guessing, you know what? I'll go 14 seconds this time. Let's see here, total 4. Look at that. We pulled it out of D365 so fast. Couldn't even count the seconds. And then OneDrive slowed us down 4 seconds, creating this file in OneDrive. Here it is. You can see it. Everything lines up beautifully. It is a zipped package though. And then the blob way went a bit faster. And then at the end, I send a message back to D365, this acknowledgement saying, hey, we got it. Thank you. And so this message status will go from processed to acknowledged. And that step is so important because if you don't do it, the message status will be downloaded and other people could download it and it'll just kind of hang out in storage for a while. And again, you'll be pulling bad data. You only want to pull a file once. I hope you only want to pull the same file once. So it's very important for that acknowledgement. And then to see also where I got it, here is my Azure Storage Explorer. I do a refresh and I like this because I was able to unzip that data package. Now, oh, I want to open it. Here is from D365 to Azure Blob Storage, unzipped to my notepad, 100,000 lines of forecast data. Yes, I was sure. Again, I'll open it twice just to drive the point home. So, what did we learn here? I threw a lot at you, so comparison slide time. Okay, OData export, everything comes out as JSON, 10,000 record limit, but it was a live data. You can use any public data entity. You didn't have to use the data project to do the OData call. And it's great for iterative integration design. So you saw me put the customer groups into a table. I've used that same pattern in other places where, let's say, they were implementing production and had a third-party labor tracking app. So to send production orders, I made a logic app to say, hey, whenever this production order gets started, pull them all out, loop through, and then send the data to an SFTP for that labor tracker. Or even a 3PL scenario. I was talking to a friend. Whenever a packing slip or a pick slip's posted, he uses chain of command and then pulls out all those headers and then loops through those headers to get the lines and pushes it to the 3PL. So it's really good for iterative integration design, and it's a very low effort to get going. Whereas the DQ for the flat file, it wasn't just JSON. I could have set that file format to be anything, no file limit. It requires a data project. However, you could filter in that data project as opposed to trying to create a fancy OData URL. So it's great for large file exports, but there were more moving parts. And I would also argue if someone really wanted that kind of giant table dump kind of integration, you're already doing that for BI. You could already be doing that for data warehouse, data lake, something along those lines. So can you use your BI solution as part of an integration solution? That could be it. But the nice thing about the DQ is it told that story. OData, there was no story. So I think of exporting data with OData is kind of like, if you need to sneak some cookies out of the cookie jar, it's perfect because you're not going to grab the whole jar, especially if it holds a ton of cookies. But if you just want to grab 2 or 3 and not going to worry about anyone noticing, just use OData and take those cookies out of the cookie jar. So with that said, we are on to our last demo. And this one is real-time, pushing data out of D365. So I have, and this is a little bit more on the Hello World side, but I just want to show, at an abstract level, how simple this is, and you can apply it in so many ways. So my past self left the app enabled. Don't have to worry there. Let's just take a look. And this trigger, instead of a time, all it's going to be is waiting for someone to call. So I have this Adele trigger, let's call it, and it's going to get a parameter and then compose this word of the day is whatever this other app sends it. So I'm going to jump into my fancy dev VM where I took this HTTP post URL and I put it into this job. I do not think there is a job that does more that you could write with less code. All it does is I take that URL, I have a JSON string that just says DynamicsCon, and then I use the retail API to make this post request to it. So while this is just a simple job that I'm going to run, you could easily hook this into some sort of chain of command or other business event in the system. So again, packing slip posts, you want to do a real-time integration to your 3PL, you can have a contract class, put all your information, and call the logic app. So to have this run, I'm just going to use sys class runner. We're going to get the spinning D, and it's already done. And let's look at our logic app history. Do a little refresh. Success. And let's see here. It got the call from D365. And the word of the day is not raccoons, DynamicsCon. So I know that was kind of hello world, but I just want to show even though it is more technical and you need to write code, you can do a lot with a little. This is just a couple lines, and I was able to call a logic app with this very simple job. And we'll be sure that everyone has access to it later. Like, do not worry about screenshotting it. Like, we got you. Okay. And so those are all of my logic apps. Final thoughts. So again, one of the big things is don't forget that everything you know about D365 data management already applies. Filters, data projects, setting threads and helpers for entities, XLST transformations, or is it XSLT? Those work. Business logic, set-based processing flags work. You can use it. You can use it all. It's a great way. Logic apps is just the mechanism to get your file there, and then everything else is D365. In your designs, try to reduce chattiness. Do not recreate the raccoon app I had. You could just get if you do that too much, you'll get throttling errors, and you don't want to deal with that. Same thing if you have a recurring app and you set it to run every couple seconds, you're just gonna bug the heck out of D365. You could get a throttling message, and you don't want to do that. If you are concerned about performance, something to investigate is send, receive, and batch process messages in Azure Logic Apps. That's right, that's batchable. There's this send and receive design pattern that can help you do a lot of that. So that's a great thing to research after this. And also, don't worry about raccoons. Like, stuff's going to happen. You're going to have a ton of successes. There'll be some issues, of course, but it'll work out. Everything's going to be really transparent. And I think Logic Apps does such a great job of allowing you to transparently work with D365 and send data back and forth. And again, if you have any experience with Power Automate, that's going to transfer to here really well. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for joining my DynamicsCon session. Once again, I'm Michael Stashwick. Very, very Googleable, trust me. And I look forward to seeing all your comments in the live Q&A next. Hey everyone, how's it going? Thank you for watching my session. I hope you all enjoyed it. One of the first things, I wrote down a few notes that I got from people. I need to correct myself at the end. I talked about how you could, if you ran the raccoon app a bunch of times, you could get a throttling message, and that's actually an incorrect statement. Whenever you use the recurring framework, that actually does not get throttled. Only web APIs and OData calls get throttled. So that's actually kind of an underlying reason why I do the things I do. However, you still want to do your best to reduce chattiness. So first thing, Mel, I saw you had a question around the learning curve, like how long did it take to learn? And I would say that the learning curve is, it's not bad. Like the first app I made was definitely the worst. But the biggest thing is learning how to do those HTTPs. Like once you connect, it's logic apps are ERP agnostic, they're system agnostic. So if you run into any issue with doing something with your data, it's a common problem that everyone in the world has. So it's really easy to research. The hardest thing is getting connected to your instance, and then also just calling things back and forth with parameters, not just, you know, saying, hi, what's going on, being able to pass parameters. And then when you look through that run history, it's pretty easy to get through those messages and see what's going on. So I would say the hardest thing is getting connected, which is something that I tried to put a lot of in the presentation, making it easy to get connected. And then from there, it's a lot of common patterns that everyone does, like pulling data out, doing something with it, pushing data in, letting D365 do the rest. So there's really only 2 or 3 things I ever do with the logic apps, and I know how to get connected. So then everything, once you kind of get to that point and everything falls into there, it's pretty easy to get going, I think. You just have to get that first app under your belt. And then I saw Jake, what's the deal with OData actions? Well, one, HTTP always works. It's been there. It's not going to get deprecated. And like I started, there's no throttling. I think throttling is a big issue that, you know, people are going to start to see more and more. So I think it's important, especially for large scalable integrations, to set yourself up for success and not have to worry about throttling. I also think if you're doing the recurring framework, you don't have to worry about company context the same way you do with OData. I know cross-company stuff can get weird there, but I think HTTP, it just always works. The connectors will always be there. It's a lot more scalable and no throttling. So that's my number one thing. Let's see here. I struggle trying to figure out how to navigate through the JSON data and without a million loops. Any thoughts on a tool or documentation to handle nested objects? Jake, I'm not totally following that question. So are you talking about composite data sets? Because the other reason I really like doing these HTTP posts is if you have a composite data set, let's say a sales order with a header and lines, you can push in one transaction an XML, JSON, any sort of document with header and multiple lines in one file. You can push that to D365 this way. And I really like that because then you don't have anyone saying, hey, did I get every line? Did I get every line? If you do that with OData, it's super chatty. You push the header, then all these lines, then you might have to say, hey, did I get every line that I meant to send? So the ability to push a single composite message is another big reason why I always push to go this way. But yeah, but yeah, and I would say you kind of want to cut down on loops as much as you can. They don't perform very well. I think you saw, I used just one loop in that customer group example, and it wasn't many records, and it was kind of slow, right? So I try to figure out the best way to streamline and push as best as I can there. And yeah, part of it is what it is, right? Just the way it is. I forgot who sang that song. I hope I didn't date myself. Was it Celine Dion? Can someone comment? I think it was Celine Dion. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, yeah, security. So in finance and ops. So I don't have this instance anymore. It got blown away. But
But if you have D365, thanks for confirming, Celine, what you can do, what ties your client ID to your instance is if you go to sysadmin, Azure Active Directory Applications. The menu object is sysaad client table. And that's a grid form that has the client ID, a name description, and the user ID. So when you register the Logic app in Azure, you get the client ID. You put a record in this table with the client ID and a user ID. If you're using a WMS app, you'll also see a client and that user here. So you could have theoretically multiple client IDs and tied to multiple user IDs in one instance. Do you really need to do that? I don't know. A lot of people have gotten away with just tying everything to the admin account. And then when you create your data project, again, you'll refer to that client ID that's in Azure Active Directory Applications, and then link it to your Logic app. So, one of the ways the apps are secured, so not just anyone starts pushing data to, your instance of D365, is keep the secret a secret. Don't let it out. Or the client ID. Those are really tricky GUIDs that you just don't want to hand out to anyone. And let's say you do give it to someone, some unsavory character, you could always delete, recreate a new one pretty easy. And those different clients and secrets will also help you keep your different instances like UAT production apart from each other. Okay, scrolling. I hope that answered security. How about cost? Any tip on what not to do? What security control? Okay, so I'll do cost. So the cost is vague, and it is, like I said, you only pay for what you use, but just kind of like managing your cloud hosted dev VMs, you want to turn stuff off when you're not using it. So I worked on this presentation on the weekends and then did my day job during the week. And one of the weeks in between working on the session, I left my apps on and I had the recurrence to every 3 seconds. And I ran up a $160 Azure bill and just wrecked myself. So that's on me, right? So one, don't have something run every 3 seconds. That's why you might have also noticed I had changed it to 3 months. So even if I did leave it on again, I wouldn't hurt myself. I don't want to keep hurting myself repeatedly. So one, reduce chattiness. And I think that's the biggest tip when you're doing it. Reduce chattiness. Otherwise, it is pretty cheap to develop and get going. And it's also easy to get credits. So reduce chattiness there. And then what security controls which entities someone can use? So again, so in this case, let's say you're using the recurring integration framework. That's going to get posted through the sysadmin user to the data project. And then a batch job is going to pick that up from that user too. So any public data entity that's exposed is going to be available there. If you do want to lock entities down, you can make them not public, or something you might have to do is make a tie your app to someone who is an sysadmin. But that can get super tricky. And then the same thing, like pulling data out, if you're also worried about, can anyone just pull out financial data maybe? That's going to be tied to the user, because those OData URLs, any user can put that into their favorite web browser, right? So that's tied to their user. What about OData batch headers, lines, transactional support? What about it? I tried to be as kind as I could during this presentation. I don't like OData. I don't think it works for big projects. I don't think it's scalable. Well, there goes being kind. But yeah, I think you should use the recurring integration framework. You can insert a 2,000 line sales order, header and lines in one message in one swoop and be done. I think that's the best way to do an enterprise integration. Cool. Emojis, emojis, emojis. James betting. I think we're good. Yeah, thank you again, everyone. My name is Michael Stashwick. See, that's in the corner. Oh, data doesn't know. Thank you. Correct. I need that on a t-shirt, Lauren. Oh, data does not pass the vibe check. So thank you, everyone. Feel free to hit me up anytime ever if you have questions. I am going to make a companion blog post on D365 stuff to get in the details and kind of reiterate these things, correct myself, and have more detail for you to refer to. So if you do want to use this in your real life, you can just read a quick blog post instead of trying to find a special moment on YouTube. So, thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.